The improvement's very impressive.
Yeah, it's come a long way since we started. It's a lot of hard work.
I'm sorry, Tom.
Go ahead.
You sure? Yeah, it's the most optimistic and encouraging report that we've seen out of 15. So congratulations. It's really nice. There are certain things that concern me. EFIT, I mean, largely the operational compliance is due to the success of EFIT in terms of keeping the department on track in timeliness of use of force investigations. But if you look at the difference between level 1 and level 2 and 3 use of force investigations, you see a big difference, and it's important because level 1, the department is freestanding. The APD is investigating all those in their own resources. Level 2 and 3, we have EFIT. In use of force, level 1, you only meet the deadlines on 58% of the time when you're flying solo. When you have EFIT, you do better. And even with EFIT, you average 88 days per investigation, which is only 24 hours less than the cutoff period of 90 days. And I'm really concerned. I mean, I think it's great progress, and I don't want to put a wet blanket on it. But if you look at what you're doing without EFIT and what you're doing with EFIT, I see a difference. And I'm worried that when EFIT leaves, and EFIT's costing the city a lot of money, and they're not going to be willing to pay for it forever, we're going to see backsliding. What are you doing as a department to institutionalize those changes that we have seen in this last report, which I compliment the department on?
I can handle that.
Corey, can you explain that? I think the level 1s, I think there's a misinterpretation of the deadlines that are being missed on level 1s as opposed to the deadlines on level 2 or 3.
Sure.
The 90 versus the hours.
Yeah, it's 30 days, I think, in level 1, and level 2 and 3 are 90 days. Admittedly, level 1 is less, 60 days less, but they're much simpler investigations. They're petty misdemeanors, as we might say.
I can answer that. And I wouldn't say 100% of them are less, because you have to keep in mind, if there's certain parts that are added into, they automatically jump into a level 2, or depending on that, they actually jump up to a level 3. So automatically IFD will have 90 days compared to the 30 days in the field. But there's a couple things that we're doing to kind of remedy that. And just so you know, our level 1s have improved immensely over the last year. Like, let me just put that out there, that our field supervisors and our area commanders are doing a really, really good job. We're better than we were the last few monitoring periods. One of the things that we are doing is we're conducting a pilot. It should start at the beginning of August, and it's more to create a sustainable process for level 1s. And the idea behind it is we're going to have a unit. It's a level 1 unit, and it's going to be a 2-layer review versus a 3-layer review, which is currently happening in the field. So right now it has to go to a sergeant, lieutenant, and commander. This one here will be the civilian investigator and then a supervisor. So that should really cut down the time that it's required. And in that proposal is also a reduction in the amount of OBRD or on-body recording device or body camera that we have to watch. That takes up a significant time. And you have to remember, our field supervisors are still trying to manage their people, go to certain types of calls, and still do the uses of force reviews. So you have to remember that they have IFD has one road, right? Their job is use of force investigations. Our field commanders and our field lieutenants and sergeants, they have multiple roles in this. And one of them is to be able to supervise their people. So we're hoping in this new pilot that will help exponentially. It's really kind of to help. And the idea behind it is not only to free up our officers, but it's to free up our supervisors so they can actually go do actual supervision with their people in the field on a more constant basis, which right now they're spending a lot of their time doing administrative functions such as use of force reviews. So I definitely get your concern. We're definitely trying to forward think to where we can improve level ones like we're doing with 2s and 3s, and then starting to plan for when EFIT does leave, because we will be doing stuff on our own, and we feel confident that we're giving all the tools and we're having the people in place that we can do so.
What's the timeline for evaluating that new level 1
Yeah,
plan?
once it starts, it'll be 3 months. It'll be a minimum of 3 months, and we're starting in 2 area commands. Valley happens to be one of them, and Southeast is the other. So Commander Norris and Commander Langwit have voluntarily told to do this pilot. But I think it will really benefit it, because that's where the most of our level 1s and 2s come from, and we're in close proximity to help them. And I think this is a good plan. However, we still have to create the training, and then we have to deliver that training and then go operational in August is what we're hoping for, just depending on the complexity of the training and if they understand it well enough that we can go forward. But it should go up until November.
So about what time frame could we ask you for feedback on how this has gone?
Yeah, really, we're going to do evaluation after 2 weeks after we start it, and then every month after. So I'm looking at, I think September, there's a good time for us to ask how it's going.
Okay, thank you.
I'll put that in my notes.
I have a question from somebody about the shutdown on Albertson on Curzon Central, but that's outside of our command area, but we can still find an answer for you. Does anybody?
Yeah, they had a barricaded
Yeah.
subject. They had a barricaded subject that had fled from a stolen motor vehicle that was possibly armed with a gun, barricaded in the bathroom, actually, at one of the gas stations there. So it's probably just grown into that larger area.
Okay, that doesn't make it into a petty misdemeanor. God, I suddenly misdemeanor. That's not a petty misdemeanor.
No, that's a quite good felony.
That does relate to a question that I have about officer-involved shootings. They're level 3, right? Obviously, or they're a higher level.
No,
Why can't they be picked out and reported on separately instead of being lumped in? All we get is, there are so many happening on level 3. So why don't officer-involved shootings get reported on separately? Is there any reason for that?
We can do that, Rowan. We actually typically, when we brief like force review board, they'll know out of the level 3s how many of them are officer involved shootings. We do separate them in the annual use of force reports. I think really we kind of lump them together because they are level 3s. I mean, it really just, they fall into the same pool. They're investigated the same way, but we can definitely break that out. It's easy to do because we do it on a weekly basis.
It's a question that we get about
Sure.
involved shootings, and people ask how many there were. And when you just have level 3s and the number of level 3s, you don't know how many of those are actual officer involved shootings.
Of course, that's an easy one.
We have a question in Q&A, but I think it's for, oh yeah. Well, what 3 paragraphs did APD drop out of compliance? There are a lot of paragraphs that you dropped out of compliance for. Which paragraph in particular, which is the big one that you dropped out of compliance for that you were crying into your beer about? Which is the huge one?
If I could guess, it was probably the use of force ones. That's typically what people are more concerned about, right? So that's, we did fall in 3 for IMR-16, and they're all related to tasers. And just keep in mind, it's the tasering of a potentially passive resistant person, but also know that APD caught every single one of those. So all of those we counted as out of policy use of force, but it does go towards those particular paragraphs because they're ECW specific.
Yeah, I read about that in the IMR. I got to about page 150, so I read about all those cases that were mostly taser related in the level 1s. But it was good to see how few officers were out of compliance and were further disciplined by comparison to level 2s. I think I got to level 2s. I hope that answers your question, Mr. Turpin. I guess, oh, I have another question about training. Are you still working with CNM?
Yes, we still have a contract with CNM. And I believe we just had a graduation in the last week or so. Yeah, Chief is shaking his head.
Is it a complementary training or is it the same training? Is it some kind of academic aspect of the training, or what is it that they get at CNM?
It's to help supplement because we're trying to run so many people. We're obviously trying to heavily recruit. And so CNM is able to provide a lot of training that is New Mexico DPS required. And that's where a lot of our cadets can go through, and then they would transfer over to the APD side to be able to finish out their remainder that is specific to APD. Because you have to remember there's certain specific training that only APD is able to do, or we do compared to the rest of the state. But we do have that.
What does DPS stand
The
for?
Department of Public Safety. So that's where all of our training is housed in Santa Fe.
Okay. All of your training is housed in Santa Fe.
That's where, so we send all our curriculum. So all of our curriculum is housed, everything gets approved to them. And so that's where they monitor the mandated hours by the state, New Mexico Department of Public Safety. They require so many hours of basic training. We have to prove that. And that's where everything physically gets housed. And then we keep our own records here with APD.
Has the relationship with CNM been satisfactory? Has it worked well?
I can't go too far into because I don't know too much, but from as far as I can tell, everything's been working really well.
Chief Medina, have you been happy with the CNM training?
You know, of course, I'm going to be happy with it because I helped to design it. Well, when I was the deputy
I
chief.
remember, yes.
The whole goal was, you know, and I really think it's the future of law enforcement. I think that there's a lot of states, California, Colorado, that allow somebody to go to a higher educational institute and get a certain portion of their training conducted. And this was just the first step in us being able to move in that direction. I hope that someday this could end up being where somebody goes and gets advanced training for 3 years and it counts towards 3/4 of their law enforcement training, and then they come out and they do the practical. And the reason I say that is, like, just right now, an officer may practice 2, 3, 4, 5 police reports in the academy, and, you know, use of force investigation, you know, may do 1 or 2 use of force reports. And I'm hoping that by putting them into an educational institution where they could get, you know, their certification over 3 years, they could write hundreds of use of force reports. They could write hundreds of police reports. Like, the whole curriculum could be developed properly where it's just reinforcement and reinforcement time and time again of those principles that are most important to them. So I'm very satisfied with it. I still say it's a first step, and hopefully we could get the state legislature in the state of New Mexico to recognize that the future is creating some kind of program where we could highly train individuals through a good educational institution to meet all the requirements of being an officer, and then just when they come out, do like firearms, driving, defensive tactics, and then roll them into the streets to be law enforcement officers. Because we could really advance, you know, even just think of a whole semester instead of a week of constitutional training, a whole semester of constitutional training with examples and taught by real professors. So I think it's the future, and I hope we could get there someday.
I know Mr. Winterbottom has a question, but really quickly before he asks it, they get all their writing reports training at CNM.
They get the introduction to it at CNM, and then of course they'll do a little bit more with us. But you know, some of the compliments I've heard from CNM is like they really took it to next level. Some of their training, they had scenarios. Like, one of the early scenarios I really liked is they had to go do consensual contact with individuals and get information and interview them, and they just put them out on campus, and they just contacted kids on campus that were part of the program, and they just spoke to them and generated conversations. They even started practicing, like, before COVID, they were doing like their version of coffee with cops in the cafe with students and the cadets in the morning. So there's a lot of different things that I think they brought upon it to help them develop that program that I really support.
Okay, Dick, it looks like you have 2 questions. The first one about the superintendent position.
Yeah, I mean, My question is, what's happening to the superintendent's reform, superintendent of police reform position? It's been open since December, and we knew in August that the former superintendent was going to resign, and we didn't start looking for one until December. I think it's April, you announced a hiree, and it was retracted maybe 10 days later. And I think it's still vacant. What's the story?
Yeah, the mayor's office is still looking for the right person. I mean, I feel comfortable. I think Deputy Chief Garcia has proven himself. Deputy Chief Garcia does a great job over there in the position. The officers like Deputy Chief Garcia, not because he's easy on discipline or because he lets people get away with things. He likes them because he thoroughly reviews cases. He puts the time and effort into it. So, we have Eric there temporarily, and the mayor's office is looking for a superintendent of reform. They thought they had found somebody, and then they realized that, they weren't all on the same page, and we have something that's working, and we want to keep moving in that direction. So that person, they probably would have been good, but they had kind of a little different vision of the direction we were going. So the mayor's office, I know they told me that they were speaking to a couple other applicants who had been in the process, and they're looking to see who they could find to fill that position.
Is the union sitting at the table, quote, sitting at the table or on the mayor's shoulder, making that decision?
No, the union don't make decisions on who we hire.
Well, people might differ with you, Chief.
How's that? Who is the union? If they could give us one name of who the union wanted that we brought on.
I'm sorry?
I mean, I don't think there's anybody that anybody could ever point at and say that's the person the union wanted and their union got that person because it was their choice.
Well, the union is never satisfied. We know that. But there were rumors that the former nominee or appointee wasn't union friendly.
There's accusations about everybody. The union, I personally spoke to Sean, and Sean said he wasn't going to fight it, that it just wasn't it wasn't worth the battle for him. So Sean didn't seem to have any problems with, like I said, the issue seemed to come down to a different view of what reform looked like and how we were structured.
Well, that's a good question. What does reform look like? What were the differences between what was her name, Dr. Watson, view of reform and the departments? Because that will give us an idea of really where the department is going and what the philosophy of reform is.
I think the philosophy of reform is something that's sustainable, something that makes sense, and something that's going to be here when DOJ and the monitor leave. I've been a big proponent. I have argued for the past 2 years over the amount of video review. Elizabeth is on this call, and she could probably remember in January of 2021, I asked for us to reevaluate the amount of video that was being reviewed on use of force cases because it's unsustainable. There's no way we could keep up with it. It's the first thing that when DOJ or the monitor leaves, that the next chief, I promise you, would change because it's unsustainable. So we're working towards that. And to me, it's creating processes that are going to be sustainable and will remain in place when the Department of Justice and the monitoring team leaves. I refuse to have policies and practices in place that I know are just checking a box for the time being, and I know the next chief. Because I will tell you, if I was the next chief and I came in or I was still here and that policy on that much video review was there, that'd be the first thing I changed. So I'm trying to make the changes so we stay in compliance as everybody is still here at the table and we're being monitored. So it's simple. Reforming the department is about making sure our officers are constitutionally policing, making sure that making sure that our policies are sustainable, they make sense, and making sure that we have policies that are trainable and that our officers understand and that truly help us do our job, protect people's rights, but at the same time, I don't lose an officer for 5 hours while they were involved in a forced handcuffing incident, and citizens continue to wait hour upon hour for a burglary call that they need an officer to take.
Well, hasn't EFIT streamlined that process and released
It-
officers at the scene that they don't need?
EFIT is starting to streamline some of those processes, but some of those processes, when you say you don't need officers at a scene, that's very difficult. And it's not like these officers can just go back into service. Somebody has to go there, start that investigation, and they got to interview everybody to figure out who still needs to remain at the scene. The officers do not make the decision, I'm staying or I'm going. They're there until they're released from the scene. That takes a period of time. So that's why we're hoping that we could change some of these processes and we could have a more sustainable process.
Is that something that's written into COVID or written into policy?
COVID.
COVID, CASA. Written into CASA or written into policy?
It's not. It's written into our policy, and it's written into our policy and it's a practice that we've been doing, and it's something that we've done. It's not. And Corey, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not written exactly that we will review video from the beginning of the video starting when the officer's en route to the scene till the person's dropped off at the jail. But I think that that's where some of the disagreements have come of what is the proper amount of video that we need to review is.
Okay, I'm going to pull us back into the superintendent position because Phil has a question about that. So
Right. That since Dick brought it up, I was just wondering, when is the superintendent reform position going to be written into the chain of command in the CASA? Because right now everything goes through the chief.
You know, I think they're working on that as they develop new policies and they find places. You know, obviously updating every single policy is a task, and it's something that just can't be done overnight. So as they're going through the review of policies and procedures, they're writing in the updates that they need to write in.
By they, you mean the IMR or?
No, Corey has a group of people who help develop some of our SOPs and policies, and they automatically come up for review. So as they're finding places that there needs to be changes, they'll work on that.
Okay, thank you.
I'm waiting for a question to be typed into the chat from Mr. Baron Jones. And Dick, you had some questions about the 2 areas of the CASA that need APD's most urgent attention.
And Barry's question is on the question and answer.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Okay.
Rowan, do you want me to answer about the two important areas?
Yeah,
Let's
sure.
get Mr. Jones done first because
Okay.
he actually did type a long question. He says, it seems like the department did pretty good when it comes to internal affairs force division investigations of use of force investigations because of the guidance of the external force investigations. What is the department doing to sustain the progress once the EFIT team leaves? What is the cost to taxpayers to bring that team in? Or what was the cost to taxpayers?
Yes, I can go ahead and talk upon that, Rowan. So the original contract was 2.6 million. It did get extended. So we're looking, when you look at between that and the backlog, we're looking about a $7 million investment into APD. But a big portion of that is the extension, keeping EFIT beyond May of this year. And the reason for that is to create those processes, which we're already doing. And so I think there's a lot of misconception that IFD is not doing anything on their own. And that is absolutely untrue. IFD has done a lot on their own with EFIT there. You know, EFIT is managing it. EFIT's really working through like some of the steps, but there's the process narrative that was already developed. And that is a step-by-step of what is required for every investigation. It goes down to the minute requirement. So please understand when we're talking about the process narrative and in or out of policy, those are two different things. And our officers are doing a really good job. Now, EFIT and IFD have disagreed on about 4 cases. I don't think there has been one in the last few months. So we're getting to that point where we're thinking just the same lines as they are, right? Which is exactly what we want. Our supervision is still a little bit of a struggle. And that is where we're trying to fit in, our supervisors have to know what their role is. They have to be able to interject when they're supposed to. There's a lot of stuff that needs to still go in that order, but our investigators are doing their cases within 60 days. That is actually our requirement is 90 days. It's only the stipulated order that adds 60. So that's just to kind of put in some cushion. So we made sure that we were able to develop some processes internally. So like Chief was saying, that is one portion for our sustainability. One of the areas that we're doing very well in, which quite honestly, I wasn't expecting it to do as well at the very front, is interviews of personnel, whether it's officers or witnesses. We're actually doing a really good job. We have 9 people and another 2 that are about to go in to the transition phase. So what we're missing is like smaller parts and we just have to put it together. That's not as easy as everyone thinks. It is not just something we can simply tell our people to do. We have some very young detectives. We have very young and inexperienced civilian investigators that we really have to grow into these positions. So that is what we're talking about sustainability. It's those processes like Chief talked about. We're having to show them, smaller things. A lot of these guys have never been investigators before. And to expect them to investigate their own personnel, that is a very heavy lift to ask someone to do. And so we're moving very well, in my opinion.
So and that's like you want the monitor. The monitor said very clearly that his ideal situation is to not have to come to Albuquerque anymore.
Yeah, that's my ideal situation.
Chili or anything. He just wants to be made redundant and EFIT also. And somebody has a question about, will EFIT clear the 600 plus backlog of cases, or will APD be responsible?
That's where EPIT comes in. So they will be responsible for the 667 cases completely. So they will go from the very beginning to the very end. And again, as Force Review Board gets to review some of these cases, they will be reviewing any out of policy. EPIT will be providing to the FRB any out of policy use of force and any officer involved shooting. So, and then the rest of it, they're going to be giving us trends and some data for us to be able to help, like, okay, do we see something else here that we haven't fixed in the policy yet? Or have we already fixed it and we moved on? So that's a non-issue. Or is anything else that we need to train that looks like we have not addressed in our current training curriculum? So, I mean, it's that kind of stuff that we're doing, but they are going to be responsible for that. The contract has been signed and approved by City Council, and we should be up and running in June.
The other thing is, and I think this is the other part of Mr. Barron's question, is, are you working, if you're working towards a time when you won't need EFIT anymore, are you always conscious of that you're going to have to work without that support at some point, and to work toward that? Not that you don't love the EFIT people or anything like that, but you really need to get to a point where you just plain don't need them, which is they're helping you fulfill that section of the CASA, I assume.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're definitely planning for doing stuff on our own. I can tell you right now, there's paragraphs where in operational compliance, we just don't have the data to show it. And that is where, someone asked me what the top 2 were: data and sustainability. Data is our number 1, because there's stuff in there, and I'm just going to use, and I'm sorry, because most people get bored with this, but I'm going to use one paragraph specifically. It's paragraph 44. It requires our officers to do 3 things: to get medical attention when someone needs it, to call out their mileage when they transport someone, and to take the most direct route. We do all of those. So our job is to try to be able to extract so much data, but you have to remember that data is actually in the investigations themselves, not easily extractable. Once we get that done, and so we're starting to come up with plans now that we have the Director of Data Analytics, Peter Valère, on board, trying to extract that data so we can show that we're in compliance, because I guarantee you there's a number of paragraphs that we've done on our own that we've been able to prove, but we just need to be able to give that to the monitor so we can get that credit. So we are working on that by and large, and everyone is very well aware that EFIT is going to go and what we need to do when they leave.
So EFIT has been extended through the next fiscal year, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Beyond that, or just the next fiscal
Their
year?
actual deadline is May of 2024, although they don't expect to stay that long either. They're planning on wrapping up with EFIT 1 and then so they're putting the remainder of their people on EFIT 2, which is the backlog team.
Okay. Are there any other questions? I think I've answered I think I've got Mr. James's question answered satisfactory. Oh, Mr. Jameson, Dr. Jameson, did you still have that question about the superintendent and when it will be put into CASA, when the position will be incorporated into the CASA?
No, they addressed that, Rowan.
Oh, good, good.
I would like to go ahead and put forward a question that I've heard from the public regarding all of this, and just to make it clear for everybody's mind. So we're talking about levels of compliance in the 9 sections. I mean, at what point do we have enough compliance that the CASA can be declared closed and we can get out from under monitoring? Is there a figure?
So as it's written now, we have 2 years, and Chief said this a few weeks ago, so it's no guess. We have 2 years is our goal to get out of the settlement agreement, is to get us, let me rephrase that, is to get all the remaining paragraphs into operational compliance.
2
That's
years
our, so really May of 2024.
Okay.
So as of IMR-19.
And is that 95% compliance? Is that the figure, or is there some other figure?
Yeah, you have to be 95% compliant in the paragraphs, and then that's what's considered compliant, and then you can go into operational. And so we're hoping to get all of our paragraphs that are remaining, which are 82, into operational compliance by IMR-19, which is May of 2024. But just keep in mind, the reporting period for that specific time actually ends January 31st of 2024. So we have a lot of work ahead of us in the meantime.
And then correct me if I'm wrong, after everything's in compliance, there's another 2 years that the
Yes.
DOJ sticks around to make sure that.
Yes, it basically starts the clock of compliance, of saying, okay, now they're good at. Now just keep in mind, I think I mentioned this before, but we're going to do the motion for suspended compliance, which means, which we're requesting 61 paragraphs to be basically not removed out of the CASA, but for us to be able to self-assess. And that's for my group. That's Kara and her group, is to basically take the place of the monitor and show that we can remain in compliance while they're still here. And so you can see the benefit of doing that while they're here, so they can kind of oversee us and make sure that we're doing everything right and that we don't have any missteps. But we have some paragraphs that have been in operational compliance for a very long time that I feel very confident that we can do our own self-assessment and improve compliance.
Sergeant Carter, I'm sorry, I'm just saying that you're in the Oversight and Compliance Division.
Yes, I'm in the Accountability Bureau. So within my bureau, just so everyone knows, we have, like Chief said, we have the policy unit. We're going to have the level 1 unit. We have the force review board unit. Then we have a couple of other units, but performance metrics unit, which is basically our auditing group.
Right.
That's the group that we're hoping that will take place of Dr. Ginger and his group, and be able to monitor and evaluate us on a regular basis and show that we're remaining in compliance.
So I guess I have a question about the Compliance and Oversight Division. That comes directly under you?
Yes.
Okay, so Sergeant Carter, what do you see yourself doing in that division? What is your role?
So right now I'm the sergeant for the Force Review Board unit.
Okay. So do
And
you
so hopefully we're working towards paragraph 78 and 99.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. That's all. Any other questions?
Yeah,
Oh,
Rowan,
sorry, Dick, I didn't see your hand. Go ahead.
Deputy Chief Lowe, I'm a little confused. When the monitor, presumably, hopefully, in May of 2024, finds you in substantial compliance, or not, I'm sorry, not 95% compliance, and you go to, then the second phase kicks in, where you have 2 years. Are you self-monitored, or does the independent monitor still stick around and give semi-annual or more reports?
So I'm going to go ahead and read something off of, since Elizabeth Martinez was nice enough to put in the CASA paragraph. So 342 is what drives this whole thing, like really kind of just drives this whole conversation, is talking about is the 2 years. Full and effective compliance is defined, requires sustained compliance with all materials within the agreement. So that's basically saying that we're going to do our own, and then we're going to be able to, like I said, self-assess and be able to prove. So we're going to provide those compliance levels, and they're going to, be able to look at us and go, okay, yes, you guys are there. You guys haven't slipped anything major. And we're basically going to be telling our story for the courts. I mean, that's really kind of what I envision, is I want to be telling the courts and the community what we've done ourselves, and calling out anything that we have done, not so great as well. And just being able to highlight all the data that supports our this process along the way.
Okay, but then I'm sorry, but then what happens once you've done that, and the court says, okay, you've got 95%, then that 2-year period kicks in. But tell me, who monitors you during that 2-year period?
That's where DOJ's are, and we're going to be doing our own monitoring. And then once we're done and we continue, because that's where Dr. Ginger, like his part, he no longer has to do the active, 2-year, 2 times a year writing a report. That's why we're kind of there. And then we can ask for the case to be dismissed.
So during that 2-year period, Ginger says, okay, congratulations, you satisfied the 95% compliance. Even if it's only in the last day of the special monitoring period, you've done it. Your 2-year period kicks in. Then it's between you and DOJ, and the monitor is dismissed.
I don't want to answer too much on that, because now we're getting into the legal aspect of things. So I don't want to misspeak, but I can tell you we have the 2-year period. I won't speak too much into that. And then once that's done, we can ask for the removal of the case. I just don't want to misspeak, Mr. Winterbottom. I don't want to give the wrong impression and misspeak.
Perfectly fair. I mean, my worry is, I love EFIT, and I think EFIT's the greatest thing that happened to CASA. But if on May 30th of 2024, EFIT's there and you're in compliance, and then EFIT disappears, we've got a new world. And I want somebody to be able to an independent somebody to tell me that the department is absent EFIT running, internal affairs like it should be run.
And that's why we're hoping. So EFIT, even though their contract goes to May of 2024, they envision, and this is EFIT, that they'll be done way before that, so they can put their next resources to the backlog. But that's the point in time when we'll really be able to see how well APD does on their own compliance by themselves. And I'm confident, like we have a lot of paragraphs and requirements that are in there. I'm like, it's our data, and that we can provide it. Now, there are a couple, don't get me wrong. So I do agree with you. There are a couple in there that we're just like, we're really going to have to focus on. That is really that complete and thorough of our investigations. And I get everyone's, how they feel and their hesitation on it, but we won't know until we try it. Like, that's just a fact. Like, we won't know until all the processes that we put in place, we will not know unless we were on our own.
I'm with you, but it's a fragile.
Absolutely.
I got when I read the 15th report, I said, it's great, but it's fragile. And
absolutely.
It's like, the egg is still thin shelled. And we have all these problems, and we haven't shaken down the internal affairs investigative team between the detectives and the civilian investigators. And I hear that people are leaving. They're building, the detectives are bidding out of AA because maybe I watch too much TV, but I understand nobody wants to be in IA. And there's many vectors of fragility.
No, absolutely. And you're 100% right. Every unit has turnover. And so that's just, IFD is just on the highlighted one, right? Because that's where the spotlight is. But every unit has turnover. We lose people to promotion. We lose people to retirement. We lose people to resignation, transferring out. And that is one that's in there. But we are doing some things to try to retain them. It is not it's a very hard unit to recruit into. It just is. It's a very hard and challenging position. And the department is working really hard to be able to retain them. But we also want our officers, we want them to promote. We want them to do other things on the department. So that's where really the civilian investigators have really been able to pick up that, because when they come in as civilians, that's their job. Like there's a really good shot that they're not going to leave because they can't just easily bid out. They can go to other jobs, of course, or resign, but they can't just bid out. And just keep in mind, we had our bid in January. We are required by the CBA, which is our collective bargaining agreement, to have a bid once a year. We had it in this January and effective in February. We may not have one. We may, but we may not have one for the rest of 2022. So they can't just bid out because the bid's not over. So there's a lot of things that, and I think a lot of them is rumors over time because everyone's so worried about this division. But we've worked really hard on trying to retain some of these people. But I agree 100%. This is a very fragile division that we're really trying to help. And I give them a lot of credit for those people who go into that division voluntarily and remain there.
I guess there's a question about the ratio of civilian and sworn investigators in the IFD.
Yes, so Chief has actually allowed us to kind of overstaff, right? And especially for the civilian positions, because the stipulated order requires 25, which we got back in August of 2021 and haven't fallen below, but we're overstaffing in the turn. So right now, I think we have 11 civilian investigators and 15 sworn, but then we have 4 new civilian investigators coming in. So, I mean, we're a little bit almost half and half, and the civilian investigators have worked out very well.
Okay. Good. I know there was something in EFIT about written reports and appearance and stuff like that, and they said that that had all been resolved in their next report. Is it their third report or the second report that's come out?
For EFIT,
Third.
It's their second, isn't it?
their third quarterly just came out.
Or it's their third quarterly? I haven't read it yet. I read I did read the other 2, but I guess the second has become a complete blank, but I did read it.
Yeah, this one, the third quarterly, it talks about supervision and it talks about the process narrative. And that's why I'm really big on explaining the difference between the findings of an investigation and the process narratives are 2 different things, because we do have a relatively high failure rate for process narrative, which by the way is going down very, very quickly because we put some processes in place and some supervisions and milestones for supervision. So, I mean, I think we're already hitting that stuff on the head, but our findings for use of force investigations are actually really, really high. Like we're doing a really good job. I think that like I said, we've disagreed, I think on 4, but I mean, when you think about it, that's not a whole lot to disagree on. Everyone else, they're finding these out of policy and in policy uses of force.
Could you define process narrative a little further?
Sure. So that's the step-by-step process. You know, we had to develop that when EFIT first came on, and it talks about something as simple as a use of force happens, the sergeant calls IFD supervisor tells a individual, which is the investigator, to go out. All these are individual parts, and it goes all the way through to include, did you collect witness statements? And with those witness statements, were they signed appropriately? Did you do your investigative plan? So it goes from like A to Z, all the way through the findings. And that is what they're measured on. So they have a rubric in which they evaluate each investigation on. So we can lose the process narrative from some failures at the on scene. So if we didn't get our witness statements right, you're right off the bat, you're failing something of that process narrative. Then if if the sergeant didn't meet with their investigator within 72 hours of that to create an investigative plan, that automatically takes it out. So there's all these components that are in there that over time can make you actually fail that component. And so after every investigation, you'll see one part in there from EFIT that basically says, this use of force investigation is either in or out of compliance with the process narrative. And so that's where you'll see that higher number in the EFIT, because we were 44% failure rate, which we're already down, but that was part of it. And so I always want to make sure everyone understands, it's not that the investigation was bad, it's that we're missing certain components of the investigation in that process that, and all the details matter. So please don't misunderstand, all the details do matter, but they're not getting their findings wrong. And I think that's the important part to also remember in this process. Does that help, Rowan? I don't want to go into too much detail.
Definitely. I just wanted to know the difference. It sounds like a very torturous and involved process, but Was it hard to train the civilian in that process, or did they do well?
You know, the civilians, you got to remember, like, they never really knew, they don't know policing to begin with, and they never knew what the investigations looked like prior. So it's almost like seeing a brand new, so they're learning for the first time. So it's not actually hard on them. It was actually harder on the sworn, because especially the ones that were already there, because they were already used to the way they did business. And then you added all this, and no one really realized how many steps went into investigation until you put it on a document. And it is extremely long and it extremely detailed. And I think that was the harder component, is to actually get our sworn people trained on that.
Any other questions for DC Lowe? Or for Sergeant Carter? Thank you so much for the PowerPoint presentation, Sergeant Carter. Thank you a lot. And thank you, DC Lowe, as always.
Well,